Hi, I'm John Landis, and I would like you to subscribe to Alexander Sigworth's YouTube channel, because it's incredibly important for world peace.
I still don't have an introduction to this because I still don't have a title.
I honestly think Untitled Video Game Music Podcast is a fantastic title.
Because of Untitled Goose Game.
Well, yeah.
Which we will be talking about in this episode. Our guest for episode 2 is Chris Durston. It was not the intention that the guests for the first episodes would both be named Chris. That's just the way that it turned out there. Your first published blog post was on the 1st of January 2011 on Absent Conclusion.
Was it? That you know this better than I do. I couldn't have told you that.
So how did Absent Conclusion come about?
I did have a blog before Absent Conclusion, the name of which I can't remember, and I'm not just saying that so you don't find it. I genuinely don't remember what it was called, which I started, I think, in late college, which, for those who are not English, is like 16, 17 years old. What happened was we had to do a review of something for an English literature class, or English language maybe, and I said, can I review a video game, please? And that was like the first video game review I ever wrote, and I was like, I quite like doing this, I might do it again. But I didn't have the money to play very many video games, so basically what I did was started a blog where I just sort of ranted about things that I thought about the world and didn't really form any conclusions, and that's why it was called Absent Conclusion. And it was, I think, reasonably short-lived, but I had a fairly good time doing it.
And that's when you moved on to what is either Overthinkery or Overthinker Y.
Yeah, and I don't mind. It's like RuPaul says, I don't care what you call me as long as you call me. And frankly, it's a little bit defunct now anyway. I think these days I just go by Chris on the internet because I've kind of gone through phases of doing a lot of stuff with the Overthink or whatever, and I think these days I'm kind of too busy doing other fun things, which is great, but means I don't really have time for that one thing. So
that was named after Generation Y.
I'm Generation Y, and I say Y a lot, and it also meant that I could call my content Overthinkeries, like, this is an Overthinkery, there's an Overthinkery, oh look, Overthinkeries frolicking.
And at time of recording, your most recent post was a reminder that you are in fact still posting there. That was back in November.
Yeah, that was a lie. I think it said something along the lines of, I do still exist, I'm doing things elsewhere, but I'm probably not going to be doing things here much more, which has in fact been the case.
I should have actually read that more thoroughly instead of just skimming it.
I'm sure there are like several posts on that blog which say something to the effect of, hey guys, I haven't died, I'm still blogging, I'll be back soon, and then like several months later it's, hey guys, I'm still here, you know?
It was on Overthinkery that you started a series, or a short-lived series called Musical Mayhem, which was a bit like a written version of this, where you interview various guests on their taste in music, some of whom I would like to have on the show at some point, if they ever get back to me. But you also posted original chiptunes to SoundCloud as well.
I did. So I really like making music. I don't do it very much, but I like doing it, and I'm not that good at it, but I like doing it anyway. And so I still make original music for the stuff I do now. So the podcast I'm doing at the moment, I've made the music for, which I'm quite proud of. But my basically my academic career, such as it is, has involved like trying to get video games recognised as things, and this started with music because in GCSE music we had to basically like pick a genre and write some stuff about it, and I think compose something in the style. And me being me, I said I want to do video game music, and the teacher was like, that's not a genre, and I was like, yeah, I know, but no one recognises that there are genres within video game music and it's good, so please can I do it? And she was like, fine. So I ended up taking the brief way too seriously and writing, instead of like a 30-second piece, I wrote like 12 minutes. It was like this 5-movement symphony inspired by like Uematsu or something. So yeah, that was fun.
And we'll be looking at many of those genres today. That's one of the reasons that I wanted to do this as well, because to talk about the idea of video game music as being legitimate and doing it properly and doing it very highbrow, and I think that this is going to be a very highbrow episode because we've got quite a lot of classical music in here as well that we can talk about. Like,
sure.
It's a proper Radio 4 programme where I have to get close to the microphone and talk quietly.
Do you know, Radio 4 is exactly what I was going to say. And I think Classic FM did have at one point a show that was dedicated to video game music, which I absolutely adored, and it was sadly not that long that it ran for, I don't think. But Radio 4 has also, I think, at points talked about video game music. There's a lot of, like, I guess, quote-unquote serious composition that goes on in video games that maybe people don't realise is there. And also some kind of, you know, pop tracks and some EDM and all kinds of fun things. So I just kind of wanted to get a bit of a sample of it.
The first track that you have selected is...
It's Unforgotten from Halo 2 by Martin O'Donnell and Mike Salvatori. The reason it's on here is because it's, I think, one of the pieces that made me realise that video game music was not, I guess, as homogenous as maybe I thought. A lot of kids, when I was in sort of late high school, were playing a lot of Halo. There was one guy who had like a projector up in his attic, and he just had like this little blob of blue tack on the wall where dead centre was, so he could see people in like, 6 foot high and know exactly where he was shooting them, and it was kind of cheating but awesome. But Unforgotten is a track that is, I think, kind of surprised me with how, I'm going to sound really cheesy, it surprised me with how beautiful it was, because the only thing I really knew soundtrack-wise from Halo was the main theme, which is super iconic in its own right. But Unforgotten is kind of like arresting in that it comes out of nowhere and you're like, oh, this exists.
This plays in the game during the High Charity campaign level.
Yeah, so confession time, I don't remember the High Charity level. I've played Halo 2 maybe once a long time ago, and actually I don't know that I even noticed Unforgotten at the time. I was listening to the OST like ages later and went, oh, hello. That's not a very good story.
No, it's not a very good story, no. This was performed by Northwest Symphonia and conducted by Christian Knapp with a 50-piece orchestra at Studio X in Seattle. The music was co-supervised by Michael Austin and producer Nile Rodgers.
Nile Rodgers of Chic?
Well, I know Nile Rodgers as having worked with David Bowie a couple of times.
Yeah, and of course more recently, the guy that did Happy, whose name I should know and don't.
Oh yeah, him.
Yes, that man.
Yes, God.
Colin Farrell. No. That's not right at all.
Bullseye.
No, I'm assuming it is the same Nile Rodgers. There can't be that many Nile Rodgerses working in music.
I doubt it, but this was the 6th track of the second volume of the soundtrack, which was released on the 25th of April 2006, which I believe is 2 years after the game was, and is published by Something Else Music Works. It also plays during the menu, and was also used for the menu of Halo 3. And it was also remixed as part of the Sacred Icon Suite 2 by Tetsuya Takahashi and Yasuhiro Takanashi for the Halo Legends direct-to-video series.
I think the version of it that appears in Halo 3 is, I think it's in a different key, and I think it's called Remembrance instead of Unforgotten, which is sort of quite nice if you think about it.
I believe so.
I can get really musical nerd on this if you want, because there's one thing about it that I really like in particular. I didn't plan to do... I actually have a piano, like, just in the room, if you want me to demonstrate. I don't know if it'll pick up.
You can try. That's never happened before.
I don't mean to like set a precedent that all future guests on this show have to bring their own instruments. I just happen to record in a room where there is one, so it's in a minor key. It's very sad. I'm just playing it really simply because usually it's strings. And this is fairly normal.
Oh, wow.
This is the bit that I like, right? Because this is where it changes. That major chord there doesn't belong in that key, but it's so nice. It might be immediately after that, it goes... like that. It's the major fourth for music lovers in a minor key, which I think might mean that it's in the... It's either the Dorian mode or the Lydian mode, or so. It's one of those. I'm like just enough of a music nerd to be able to name things and not enough to know whether I'm getting them right.
It is weird how, on the inside, there's this intelligent musical talent, and yet on the outside, you're just a complete dork.
Oh, I have no idea what I'm talking about half the time, but I'm like reasonably good at coming across like I do, and that's half the battle.
I think of people who play piano as being geniuses, because I just can't. I am a tone-deaf musician, that's why I went into writing.
I can set this thing to strings for like a proper effect, but we may as well just play the tune at that point.
We may as well just cut to the tune right now.
Absolutely.
So, from Halo 2, this is Unforgotten by Martin O'Donnell and Mike Salvatori. from Halo 2, that was Unforgotten by Martin O'Donnell and Mike Salvatori.
It's so good.
Your second track that you've selected today.
Second track, right. Still Alive. What video game do you think of when I say that?
Mirror's Edge.
No, you don't. You think of Portal. Come on.
I'm not that familiar with Portal.
Oh, fair enough. You're like the only person that I can say, oh yeah, video game song, Still Alive, and they won't start singing the version from Portal.
Although I have played Portal too. But,
So I've picked Still Alive from Mirror's Edge by Lisa Miskovsky, partly as a screw you to people who prefer Still Alive from Portal, because although I recognise that it's a hilarious and important song, I much prefer A, Want You Gone, which is GLaDOS' song from the second one, and B, Exile Vilify, which is the national song from the second one. And C, I also actually just prefer Still Alive by Lisa Miskovsky from Mirror's Edge. So there you go. Up yours, Portal.
Did I completely ruin the thing you had planned there?
No.
Was I supposed to say, oh, Portal 2, so you could then say, aha, no?
I think it was better that way, honestly.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, there's not much to say about this track, other than it was the first track on Still Alive, The Remixes, which was published on the 11th of November 2008 by Artwork.
It was all the tracks on Still Alive, The Remixes, actually.
Huh?
It was all the tracks on Still Alive, The Remixes in some form, yeah.
Well, yeah, but the actual version that appears in the game was the first one, because the rest of it is just remixes of it. Composed and produced by Arnthor Bergeson and Rabi Yacoub, with lyrics also written by Lisa Miskovsky.
Do you know? Because I don't. Was it written for the game? I'm assuming it was.
I believe it was. I believe it was.
It fits the game very well. I think it does play... Do you know what? It's been so long since I played Mirror's Edge that I don't remember if the song plays in the game. I think it might play at the end, but it sort of feels like... You know when TV shows or, I guess, anime series use actual pop songs as their opening, and it kind of lends this sort of... I guess this feel of like a bigger picture, because it's intertextuality to some degree. And so Mirror's Edge doing that, I think, was the first time I had heard like a song with vocals in a game. And I just thought it fits so perfectly, and I was like, this is awesome, and more things should do this.
Well, according to my research, it is the main theme from the game, so I'm going to assume that it plays at some point.
Oh, do you know, I think there is an instrumental version that plays over the menu, maybe.
Could be, yeah.
It's a very good game, actually, I think, and I do think it was underrated, because even though it was very linear, it was so fun. It was so fun. I
was only vaguely aware of it.
So if you're even vaguely aware, then you probably know it's a first-person parkour 'em up, basically, in which you run super fast and you jump on lots of things, and I think it had mixed reviews, partly because the running and jumping was the best bit of it, and actually there were a lot of bits that kind of crammed you into little hallways and that sort of thing. So the sequel tried to address this by making it open world, but actually in some ways that made it harder because they couldn't obviously account for every possible route that someone might take. So I still think the original's better, and I think it's well worth playing, especially if you like, I guess, going fast.
So, track 2 is from Mirror's Edge, Still Alive, the theme from Mirror's Edge, by Lisa Miskovsky.
Just like you, face against the wind. I will move fast, I will move slow. Take me where I have to go.
From Mirror's Edge, that was Still Alive, the theme from Mirror's Edge by Lisa Miskovsky. The third track that you have selected today.
It's the staff roll, the tune that plays over the credits of The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, and I remember that it's by Koji Kondo, but I think 4 other people were also involved in composing it, and I can't remember who they were.
They were Kenta Nagata, Hajime Wakai, and Toru Minegishi.
Have you played The Wind Waker?
No.
Me neither, but I really like this song because it reminds me of a particular friend who had a habit of like getting really into one song at a time and just being like, we've got to learn this and play it on these instruments that we have. And Staff Roll was one of them, because I think there was a YouTuber whose name I can't remember who did like a sort of live version of it where he had played all the instruments and looped it over and that kind of thing. But I have found that if you say to someone who has played Wind Waker, as a friend of mine has, do you remember the tune from the credits? They'll sort of go, oh yeah, maybe. And if you start humming it, they will be able to hum along, because it's just this beautiful little sort of jig that just makes you feel happy and like you've achieved something, which I assume is what happens in Zelda, because you usually achieve something by the end of Zelda.
It's a very joyful track. It's all Gaelic and woodwind and stuff.
Yeah, it's not kind of high seas too much, although there's a bit of that kind of rhythm to it. But from the sounds of it, actually, Wind Waker as a whole has exceptionally good music, even for a game in the Zelda series. But yeah, I just really like this particular one, and it's something that I can kind of listen to as this sounds really cheesy. So I can be like walking along in like a forest or something and play this track, and just everything feels like a bit more kind of magical. Like, it's nice.
This is also known as staff credits to some people. I don't know which one it is, although Staff Roll just sounds better. It also samples Koji Kondo's original theme for The Legend of Zelda.
Does it? I had not realised that.
Well, it's got that...
Oh, yes, of course it does, that one. I'm a fool.
The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker Original Soundtracks album was published on the 19th of March 2003 by Cytron Digital. This is track 57 of disc 2.
Track 57.
So, track 3 from The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, Staff Roll by Kenta Nagata, Hajime Wakai, Toru Minegishi, and Koji Kondo. From The Legend of Zelda The Wind Waker, that was Staff Roll by Kenta Nagata, Hajime Wakai, Toru Minegishi, and Koji Kondo. In the words of Monty Python, and now for something completely different.
Oh, yes.
The fourth track that you've selected.
This was one of the honourable mentions by your esteemed guest in episode 1, and
It
I think,
was!
yes.
And I didn't think you'd remember that.
I do remember that, and I don't know whether it was hearing it mentioned that made me think I have to include this, because... So the fourth track is Rip and Tear from Doom 2016 by Mick Gordon, which is an absolute banger of a tune.
It is, yeah.
And so I think, like I said at the start, what I wanted to do was kind of represent some different genres, and also kind of, I think, get at the fact that my general musical taste outside of video game music is kind of eclectic anyway. So I really like industrial metal. I also really like Chopin. I really like EDM to some degree, depending on what it is. And I also like sort of Finnish a cappella gospel music. So I kind of wanted to try and get a range of things in here as well, because again, I think that it's kind of criminally undercredited to video game music how wide-ranging it can be. Doom 2016 has one of the absolute chugfestiest, slap-faciest, drop-a-hammeriest soundtracks that I've ever heard in my life, and I regularly listen to it at work. I'm being completely serious, because it helps me focus and get things done quicker. So Rip and Tear is the track that I just really wanted to get in here.
Rip and Tear was created with synthesizers, which were then played through different distortions, and that was based on the concept of a civilization powered by energy mined from hell.
There's this apocryphal, well, maybe apocryphal, it might be true, story that Mick Gordon was looking to make the bass in Doom 2016 like super bassy, the bassiest of all time. And he was like, what's the bassiest thing in the world? A chainsaw, obviously. So he hooked up a chainsaw to an amp and then was planning to sort of pitch shift it later. And apparently that was slightly too gnarly even for that, because you just couldn't get a reasonable pitch out of it. But oh my god, if you told me that Doom 2016 was recorded entirely on chainsaws, I'd believe you.
I think what happened was that he found some software that could take the sound of a chainsaw and play it as if it were a musical instrument.
Actually, that wouldn't surprise me, because you see people who have done electric toothbrushes or hard drives, anything that oscillates or vibrates, you can basically set to do at a certain frequency, which will, in theory, make music if you do it skillfully enough.
The developer didn't want guitars because they thought that it would sound a bit too cliched.
I think electric guitars have potentially a slightly bad rep in video game music, partly because of Dynasty Warriors and that kind of thing, where they're really overused. But I think the sheer amount of distortion that's on everything in Doom is I'm going to say something weird, and maybe people won't agree, but I actually think it's really nice to listen to because of how well everything is distorted to the same level.
I suppose so, yeah. This particular track, at least, was played with a Mayon's Regis 8 guitar using bare knuckle aftermath pickups. And the soundtrack for Doom 2016 won Best Music Sound Design at the Game Awards 2016. And at that ceremony, the track Rip and Tear was performed by Gordon with Matt Halpern and Sonic Mayhem, and the soundtrack was then released in September of 2016. Now, here's an interesting proposition. Would you say that it's a fair comment that Doom is the only game series in which the player is the one who has the boss music?
Ooh. Do you know, I'm sure that there is another example of that, but I think, yeah, I suppose in a lot of games the soundtrack feels like it relates to the environment that you're in or the enemy that you're facing, but in something like Doom, and actually in Dynasty Warriors as well, I think, the music feels like it's the theme tune of the character that's doing all the mowing down, which is obviously you.
Yeah, so there we are. Track 4 from Doom is Rip and Tear by Mick Gordon. from Doom. That was Rip and Tear by Mick Gordon. Now, I very much like the next track that you've selected. I think this is probably my favourite track to be on the show so far. That's not saying much, because it's
Wow.
only the second episode. I heard this, and knowing very little about the game, I found it an incredibly evocative and emotional and a very moving track.
I'm just gonna do this.
That's it. That's the bit.
It's basically just that for the whole song, but it's so good.
It is. It is. That's like, oh, that really hits my brain's G spot. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. It's I've never actually been able to kind of, well, I've never really tried, but is it ASMR or AMSR? You know the one I mean, the whispery thing. That's never really appealed to me. But
No.
Streets of Whiterun, which is what this track is from Skyrim by Jeremy Soule, it does something to my brain, and my whole body goes tingly in like. Not a sexual way as such, but I mean, maybe?
Well, I think music is the most sensual thing of all.
Well, there you go.
Whiterun, in the dragon language, is... I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this. I think it's Arol Se Dovar.
That sounds right.
Yeah, and this was actually recorded just with a MIDI keyboard.
It's very simple. I mean, if I... Hang on. Right, okay, so now I've got piano and strings, right, at the same time. So if I... Okay, that really gets overwhelming quickly, but that's basically all it is, isn't it? It sounds weird on my keyboard, but the point is, it's basically just like the piano doing this melody thing, and like some strings kind of doing this really nice build up down in the bottom, and things sort of move around in relation to each other a bit, but very little happens. But I don't know whether I was actually in Whiterun in Skyrim the first time I heard it, but I remember playing the game and literally just stopping. Like, wherever I got to, I just heard it for the first time, and I just went, no, I'm not doing anything. I'm just going to stand here because I need this in my life right now. And it's been one of those tunes that I've always just come back to if I've needed to feel like at peace, I think. Skyrim is another one of those ones, I think, where I like just kind of was exposed to the OST as a whole as a separate entity from the game, and I was like, this is actually really cool. A lot of the tracks from Skyrim are really kind of calming in the way that Streets of Whiterun is.
The Streets of Whiterun was also included in the May playlist.
Oh, yeah, the playlist. This was yet another short-lived feature by Chris, where I picked, I think it was like 10 individual tracks, 2 albums, and 1 live performance, and they weren't all video game related. But I think the May one might have been the first one. So Streets of Whiterun was one of the first tracks that I was like, dudes, I totally got to tell people about this.
So, track 5 from the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim is The Streets of Whiterun by Jeremy Soule. From The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, that was The Streets of Whiterun by Jeremy Soule. Track 6 is quite different. I think it's definitely the most unique track on this list.
Yeah, track 5 is Hydrogen by Moon, although if you're looking for it, it's Moon, but there's like a vertical line between every letter. It's from Hotline Miami, which featured, I think, entirely kind of... I don't think any of it was original. I think it was all kind of contributions from sort of various EDM genres. Anyway, there's a few tracks of Moon's in Hotline Miami, but Hydrogen is my absolute favourite because it's, to use a phrase that the kids use, it's just a slap.
I've never heard that.
Have you not? It's a slap. It's a total slap. It slaps. I slap, you slap, he, she slaps. It's just perfect for the game that it appears in, and I kind of think that the test of good video game music, as with actually any element of a video game, is how well it coheres with like the overall vision. So Hotline Miami's everything just comes together really well. Like the visuals are psychedelic, the music is kind of synthwave, outrun, slightly glitch hop. I'm just naming genres of EDM now. Hydrogen is one of the most sort of mind melting of the tracks because it's so constant in its rhythm when it's playing, but it's also kind of confusing to the ear at the same time. Like it's a really simple rhythm. It just goes dum 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 and just doesn't let up. And then there's this little kind of, I assume, synthesized thing that just sort of almost whistles at the top, like, and just kind of gets in your brain. I really like it.
Do you know how funny you are?
No.
Okay.
More than one. The problem is, if you get me talking about something that I care about but don't fully understand, I will just attempt to cover for myself, and it doesn't always work.
I'm not familiar with Hotline Miami.
Hotline Miami is a top-down, extremely fast-paced sort of beat 'em up in which you can kill enemies with one hit and they can kill you with one hit. So you basically you can spend sort of like probably about 10 minutes playing one stage, but you'll die like 50 or 60 times. And there's this kind of constant pulsing of different colours in the background, like, so you can see sort of the layout of the place that you're in, and then there's just this sort of void outside that just kind of pulses in different colours and just sort of shakes. And the whole thing's incredibly disorienting, and a few people have had, cases of motion sickness and that kind of thing, and it's not very good for epileptics, as I understand it. It's not really that like anything else that I can think of, except sort of if you took some of the weirdest stuff from like Grand Theft Auto, Saints Row, and put it in the kind of early top-down Grand Theft Auto, but then put that much faster. It's very strange.
It's the first of only 4 tracks that Moon composed for the game, and was also published on the Moon EP.
I don't think the other tracks are called Helium and whatever the other elements are, actually. That would have been good. I'm not actually 100% sure what particular genre or subgenre of like EDM Moon falls into.
So, track 6 from Hotline Miami is Hydrogen by MOON. From Hotline Miami, that was Hydrogen by Moon, or Moon. Track 7 is from a series that I knew you'd be including at least one track from.
I thought long and hard, forgive me Yoko Shimomura. The track that I've picked from the Kingdom Hearts series is Face My Fears by Utada Hikaru and Skrillex, which is the opening theme for Kingdom Hearts 3. There was some soul searching involved.
The interesting thing is that in the 2 previous Kingdom Hearts games, the ending themes and the opening themes were remixes of each other.
Yes.
This is not the case with Kingdom Hearts 3.
No, so in fact, actually, the opening theme from Kingdom Hearts 1 is a remix by Planet B, I think, of Utada Hikaru's song Hikari, which is the ending theme. So it's actually the opposite way around, which is a bit weird. Because, of course, the opening credits one is the one that's all kind of pumped up and excited, and then the ending one's a bit more somber. But yeah, for Kingdom Hearts 3, you have Don't Think Twice or Chikai for the ending credits, which is a much more laid-back track, and then this pumped-up banger for the opening.
It's confusing because Hikaru Utada is also known sometimes as Utada Hikaru.
Yeah, I think sometimes she's also just called Utada.
And she wrote it with Skrillex and Jason Boyd, and Skrillex also produced it. The story is that Utada asked Skrillex to remix her ending theme for it, Chikai, because she knew that he was a fan of the series, but then he preferred to compose an original track, which is how we get Face My Fears.
Yeah, and I'm so glad he did. One thing that I kind of struggled with when doing this was just which track from Kingdom Hearts was I going to pick, and of course most Kingdom Hearts tracks are not by Utada because she just does the opening and the closings. Most of them are by Yoko Shimomura, who does kind of the rest of the OST, although sometimes they're remixes of, or I guess reimaginings of Disney songs and that kind of thing. But there is so much in the Kingdom Hearts OST sort of back catalogue that I could have picked. Then there's the piano collections, and then you have, there was a lot that I could have picked, and in the end I think I picked Face My Fears because it's a bit different from that, and it was kind of something that I wasn't expecting to like as much as I did. I was skeptical.
I believe that in your review of Kingdom Hearts 3, which you co-wrote with Blue Williams from Writer's View on The Well-Read Mage, you gave the audio a 10.
I did.
And you said, just to read out exactly what you wrote, you said, I like Skrillex now. Okay, so that doesn't really encompass the whole story, but I think that the fact that Face My Fears is just as good as either Simple and Clean or Passion Sanctuary, while feeling fresh and different, is a pretty good achievement all by itself.
That accent is a pretty good achievement all by itself.
Yeah, it's a sort of London, but not quite London.
Well, it's so I'm not from London. I'm from the southwest, but I don't sound like I'm from the southwest.
No.
But like every time I talk to anyone on a podcast about anything, there ends up being an impression of me at some point. Like, because
it's true.
You obviously have your own British accent, but of course we all have our own regional accents. And the one that you just did was not from where I'm from, but that's okay.
Oh.
Sorry, I don't mean to shame you. I just have like this weird kind of non-specific Southern British accent, I guess. I'm definitely not Northern, and that's about all you can tell. I said I like Skrillex now, and actually that was kind of a bit misleading because I never really disliked Skrillex. Like, I don't listen to his music that much, but I'm not kind of one of those people who's like, I like classical music, therefore I'm not allowed to also like dubstep. And I don't listen to a lot of dubstep, but I don't actively kind of think it's terrible or that it doesn't deserve to be recognised as good in its own right. But Face My Fears is this kind of J-pop / dubstep influenced, but not full on like EDM, with like just a bit of grandeur in there, I think. And it's very well put together, which I think actually speaks to the fact that Skrillex is, for all you might think of his composition, is actually a very good producer.
So, in just a couple of short sentences, what exactly is Kingdom Hearts about?
Right. So Kingdom Hearts came about because Mickey Mouse and Sephiroth loved each other very much. And so when a mouse and a one-winged angel love each other very much, they have a special cuddle, and then Tetsuya Nomura gets in a lift with a Disney executive. And basically, there were lots of zips, and there was lots of spiky hair. And at the end of it all, Kingdom Hearts was light, and also Lance Bass from NSYNC was in it at one point.
Uh-huh.
I feel like that about sums it up.
Yeah. So this track was recorded in English and Japanese. We'll be playing the English version. And was released as a single on the 18th of January 2019. Interestingly enough, Face My Fears references Kingdom Hearts 2's music because it's composed in the same key as Utada's Passion, and also samples chords from Yoko Shimomura's Dearly Beloved.
Yeah, so I kind of disagree with both of those things, because it is in the same key as Passion, that's true, but I don't know, like, it's also in the same key as, what else in C-sharp minor, like Moonlight Sonata, but I don't think that means it's a reference. Although Skrillex did say it makes it very easy to like join the two together and kind of get a huge crowd reaction and stuff, which sounds pretty awesome. Actually, also interesting, I don't remember whether Passion, I think Passion is the Japanese title and Sanctuary is the English title. As you mentioned, Don't Think Twice was done in both English and Japanese, as were both of the previous two openings. And Face My Fears is the first one that I actually prefer the English to the Japanese. Don't know why, just do. As for the Dearly Beloved, I don't know, I can't hear it. And it's not that it doesn't use some of the same chords, because it kind of does, but they're not in the right order. So I don't think it counts. I think I've seen the video, right, where someone is playing... So I think he puts them in the same key. So hang on. So Dearly Beloved is usually... But then if you take it up... So it's in the same key. So he's playing Dearly Beloved. Etc. And then does the same chords with Face My Fears. So he goes... or something like that, which is the same progression, but that's not the progression in the song, because in the song it's very distinctively, right? Which is the same C-sharp minor and A major, but the other way around. No one's going to understand that because I just did it really quickly, but basically the progression in Dearly Beloved is major 6, major 7, minor 1. That will mean something to some people. So major 6, major 7, minor 1. In Face My Fears, it's the minor 1, and then if it were backwards it would be 7, 6, but in fact it's weird, it's like major 3 but with a minor in the bass, and then the 6. So the point is, it goes 1 then 6, not 6 then 1. So I think that's a lie.
Right. I didn't really understand any of that.
Neither did I.
This is like a really low-budget version of a BBC4 Neil Brand documentary.
Yeah, I sort of feel like when they interview, a contemporary composer like a Morten Lauridsen or something, and he's like playing and he's kind of singing, but I'm like the super low-budget version of Morten Lauridsen explaining how he writes choral music. I'm just like, well, actually, Dearly Beloved, not the same chords.
I don't know who that is.
He's very good. He's an American, I think, composer who wrote some stuff that's good.
Track 7 from Kingdom Hearts 3, Face My Fears, English version by Hikaru Utada and Skrillex.
Should I take a deep faith? Should I take a leap? Taste what a bittersweet. All my life. Let me face my fears. Oh, let me face my fears. I'm almost here. Watch me cry all my tears. my fears. Oh, let me face my fears. Oh, I'll be long, I'm almost here. Watch me cry all but the tears. Wangaya, 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 wangaya. Wangaya, 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 wangaya.
From Kingdom Hearts 3, that was Face My Fears, English version by Hikaru, Utada and Skrillex. So before we do track 8, you have got some honourable mentions.
Oh, so many. Basically, I had a really, really hard time coming up with 8 tracks for this, and I think I could probably have done about 40 fairly easily. So I decided to just do at least as many honourable mentions as actual picks, which feels slightly like cheating, but also you haven't stopped me, so I figure it's okay. I really wanted to do something from Undertale and didn't have space on the Final Cut because I think Undertale does some absolutely fantastic stuff with the leitmotif. But the song I went with is Metal Crusher, which which is the song that plays when you fight, I think it's Mettaton EX, before he turns from being a weird little bricky robot into a Bishonen K-pop star, I think. But it's not one that people often pick. Everyone thinks of Megalovania Megalovania, I mean, that's pretty much it, or song that might play when you fight Sans or that kind of thing. But Metal Crusher just doesn't let up. It just kind of hits you and keeps going, sort of like Undertale, really. Also, the song that plays when you're in Temi Village is fantastic. I think it's just called Temi Village. It's just people going dupe, and it's great. Along similar lines, Cave Story, I think, has a really fantastic soundtrack. I think Cave Story doesn't get mentioned that much these days because it's reasonably old. I can't remember how... Have you played Cave Story?
No.
Part of me kind of sees Cave Story as the Undertale before Undertale was Undertale, because it was made by one guy. He did all the music, he did all the everything.
That's Daisuke Meya.
Yes, aka Pixel. The soundtrack, I remember thinking, was better than it had any right to be if it was made by the guy who also did the it seemed unfair that one guy could have done everything and also compose great tracks. And Moonsong, I think, is a particularly good example. Prelude number 12 by Claude Debussy, which is not the soundtrack to Untitled Goose Game, but snippets from it are the soundtrack to Untitled Goose Game, because basically the chap who did the music took, I think, a few notes at a time and just sort of told the game, if X happens, then play some quasi-random combination of this bit that fits that mood. And it just works so well, and I think more games should do that, and I will be surprised actually if more don't. I really liked, when I was a lot younger, SSX3, because it was the first time that I had realised that you could have games that featured music by regular bands and stuff, and have radio stations and that kind of thing. Obviously these days I've played some Grand Theft Auto games and some Saints Row games and a few other driving games and that kind of thing. I say other as if Grand Theft Auto and Saints Row are driving games, you know what I mean. But games that feature, I guess, licensed music, and Jerk It Out by the Caesars was I made a playlist when I was doing SSX3, because I think you can make your own radio station, and I just set it so that the only songs it played were Jerk It Out, and I think there's a Finger 11 song that I can't remember the name of that's in SSX3, and I just listened to those 2 songs on repeat because they were great.
Caesars are also known as Caesar's Palace, but, they were before there was a lawsuit with Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, and also known as 12 Caesars. But generally they're known as just Caesars.
Just Caesars.
Track 8.
Track 8 is Chopin's Raindrop Prelude, which appears in Eternal Sonata, which is a game about like a fictional version of Chopin who's kind of having a dream as he dies, if I remember right.
It's based on Chopin's last hours while he dies from tuberculosis, age 39.
Yeah, he looks a lot younger than that in the game.
Well, yeah, because he's anime.
Yes, that'll be why.
It's set in the world that he's imagining in his delirium.
Yeah, and all the characters have kind of vaguely musical theme names. Like there's a rondo, I think there's a jazz, allegro maybe.
Allegretto.
Allegretto, yeah.
And beat.
And beat, which is supremely unimaginative.
Yes. It's after Allegretto and Beat's boss battle with Baby Dragon that a flashback plays. This is the music that accompanies it.
It's interesting because I didn't know that the game was going to do this. Like, I thought it was just this kind of anime-styled turn-based RPG thing that was like sort of vaguely about a fictional version of Chopin. And the original music itself is actually quite good, but what it does between chapters is it plays one of Chopin's actual pieces and it displays facts about kind of the man's actual life. So it sort of blurs the line and defictionalizes it a little bit and tells you about the real Chopin as opposed to the one that you're seeing in the game, who I guess has also done all the things that the real one had done but is anime.
And the particular story that plays during this track is when Chopin travelled to Mallorca to improve his health, but it was the rainy season which just exacerbated his condition.
Yeah, it didn't go well.
It was then that he composed Raindrops. Although he never actually called it Raindrops, that was only a nickname given to it because people assumed that it was supposed to sound like raindrops, even though according to him it wasn't.
So his lover, who was a woman named Georges Sands, that wasn't her real name, but she took it because women couldn't put their names on things that they were writing because sexism. She, I think, wrote a letter in which she described the process of him writing it while the rain just kind of battered at the window, like kind of in this non-stop rhythm. And I think that's probably where people named it. I don't remember. I think this was published during his lifetime because there were some pieces, like one of his best known ones, The Fantasy Impromptu, wasn't published until after he died, but I think this was one that was published during his lifetime, but I've no idea whether it was called Raindrop at that point.
And this is track 3 of the first disc of the soundtrack. If I recall correctly, it was when you posted in the Well Reddit page, favourite track from a soundtrack that's not in fact a soundtrack track. It isn't a good title, but the assonance is pretty cool. You were talking about Eternal Sonata then, and you said, even if I hadn't cared for the game itself at all, it would have been enough to keep me playing just to hear more.
That sounds like something I would have said. And I think there must be other instances of this where games kind of use, I suppose especially classical music, because of course it's all public domain these days. If you can find someone to play it, you don't have to pay for the rights to actually use the composition because the composers have all been dead for so long. I said that sort of a bit jauntily, they've all been dead, brilliant, but there are benefits. But yes, I think Eternal Sonata is one of those ones that, because the game is actually about Chopin, but you're sort of not necessarily expecting to learn anything about his real life. You're expecting it to be purely like this imaginary Chopin who's kind of like good at music and maybe shares a few characteristics with the real one, but you don't really get to know much about the real one. And so having what's basically like a sort of infomercial interlude that tells you a little bit about the real man while his music plays, like, comes a little bit out of nowhere and takes you by surprise. And I think that might have been the first time I heard Raindrop, but I remember thinking, this is going to be like one of my favourite piano pieces forever, and one day I will learn how to play it, and I actually still haven't, but one day I will.
In terms of genres within video games, they generally don't tend to do documentary or biopic. Whereas it's games like Eternal Sonata that try to find a unique way of doing it within the video game format, of doing something that could be compared to a biopic or a documentary about a real world person in a way. It tells that true story, but does it as a fantasy and blurs the line between realism.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not the case that the game itself is a documentary because, well, I mean, it might be the case that Chopin actually did dream of a fantasy anime land before he died, but we'll never know, sadly. But the sort of documentary elements of it are presented as kind of a separate thing. But I think the fact that it does that and teaches you something that you actually care about and that's actually relevant, because I think sometimes, I'm sure there are some games, like probably some of the Assassin's Creed ones do it, where you're in a historical setting, so they might give you like some kind of vague historical facts on loading screens or something like that, but they don't necessarily relate to anything in either the game or reality, because of course you're much more aware then that what's happening in the game did not necessarily happen in reality. So there's kind of a level of separation. But I think with Eternal Sonata, because they picked an actual person and used his actual music, you feel, even though you know it's not his real story, as if you are kind of connecting with him. And I think I probably did actually learn more about him in terms of just like sheer facts and stuff than I did from anything else. I mean, it's not like I ever took a class on him, but I can't think of any other time where I absorbed that much information about him.
I like the idea that all of his work and all his music still lives on now in that form, and that it can continue to be reused and reappropriated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that's the case for really any musician who has... I was going to say any musician who's died, so their work's gone out of copyright, but that's a bit of a bleak way of putting it. But any musician who's ever put their work down in some way, in theory, it can be played again by someone else in future, which I think is really cool.
The actual title of this, as far as I can tell, is Prelude Opus 28, number 15.
Yeah, I mean that's how a lot of classical music is named. It's so the opus is like kind of the work as it was released, just whether it was like one continuous thing or whether it's just I've done some stuff, here it is, like an album almost. Mozart's stuff has a K on it just to indicate that he did so much. I think like if you see K382, then that means it's Mozart's 382nd. I think that could, I might have just made that up, come to think of it, but I think that's right. It's only really the more famous pieces from like the classical repertoire that actually get names. Like an awful lot of them never even get any kind of name at all.
So, track 8 from Eternal Sonata is Prelude Opus 28, number 15, also known as Raindrops, by Frédéric François Chopin. From Eternal Sonata, that was Prelude Opus 28, number 15, also known as Raindrops by Frédéric François Chopin. We've now heard all 8 of your tracks that you would want to have with you were you to be washed up on a desert island. If you could only save one track, which would it be?
The one track that I could actually listen to for all time, and I know this because I've spent literally hundreds of hours listening to it. I've got through 10-hour mixes of the same song just repeating for work and stuff, and that's Streets of Whiterun. I could literally listen to it for all of time and never stop, and everything would be okay. So much as classical music may regret a great loss, Streets of Whiterun is the one track that I would save.
I'm now going to ask you if there's a single book that you would want.
Oh lord, I really like Haruki Murakami, and I think 1Q84, if I can have the full 3-volume, the 3 volumes in 1 volume thing, then I would probably have that, because I think it would let me kind of detach from reality a little bit. And sometimes I imagine you need that on a desert island. I mean, I think some of the tracks that I picked would be quite good for sort of relaxing on the desert island and forgetting my troubles, and Rip and Tear would be great for going and hunting a boar and making a sandwich. I think I'll go with Haruki Murakami's 1Q84 if I can have all 3 volumes.
1Q84?
Yeah, as in the year 1984, but the 19 is a Q because Japanese for 9 is a Q and it's an alternate reality thing.
I've never heard of it.
If you like kind of stuff that's a bit like the real world but slightly more weird, a little bit like what Talking to Me is probably like, then Murakami is very good.
Is there a non-electronic luxury item that you'd want to have?
Like a really big Rubik's Cube, like a 16 by 16 or something, because I can do a 3 by 3, so that wouldn't keep me occupied, but if I had a 16 by 16, that would keep me going forever.
I'm beginning to get the impression that you've spent your life putting all your mental energy into knowledge and skills that are completely impractical to actual reality.
I mean, that's probably a fair assessment.
And that is it for another episode of Untitled Video Game Music Podcast. I'm Alexander Sigsworth. He's been Chris Durston. Where can people find you on the internet?
I'm glad you said on the internet. They can find me on Twitter, where I'm at Overthinkery1 or OverthinkerY1. It doesn't matter because it's spelled the same. It's the word Overthinker and then the letter Y and then the number 1 because Overthinkery was taken. And that's kind of the main place that I am these days. So I used to obviously do lots of blogging on the WordPress, and I do still kind of interact with other people who do that. So I still like to read what other people are writing and that kind of thing. But these days my energy is mostly writing my novel, which I'm hoping to be able to publish fairly soon, and working on Philosophiraga, which is a podcast of my own and is hard to spell. Hey you. Yeah, you. You ever wonder what it means to be a good person, or how we can ever be sure we know anything? Whether the world we see around us is even real? And do you also enjoy computer games? Well, then Philosophiraga is the podcast for you. Each episode, I take a look at an idea from philosophy and explain it using video games as a lens. It's a Philosophy 101 course cleverly disguised as a light-hearted show about gaming, or a very silly show about gaming attempting to masquerade as an academic production. Available wherever you get your podcasts, Philosophiraga is part of the Little Fella Media podcast network and the well-read-made family of podcasts. So join me to have a good time and maybe even learn some stuff. That's Philosophiraga, the video games and philosophy podcast.